It was a Tuesday evening when I stumbled upon the truth that would unravel my entire world. I had just returned home from another long day at work, the usual grind of spreadsheets and meetings weighing heavily on my shoulders. The house was quiet, too quiet. As I walked through the front door, I felt an unsettling chill in the air, a premonition that something was off. I dropped my keys on the kitchen counter and headed to the living room, where I found her phone buzzing incessantly on the coffee table. Curiosity got the better of me. I picked it up and glanced at the screen. There it was, messages from a contact named Jake. The name didn't ring any bells at first, but as I scrolled through the messages, my heart sank. The flirtation was unmistakable, filled with emojis and words of affection that should never have been directed at anyone but me. I felt the color drain from my face as I read the messages. Can't wait to see you tonight. And you're all I think about. Each word felt like a dagger piercing my heart. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. But the anger surged through me like a wildfire. I knew in that moment that Jake was no ordinary guy. He was a banker, someone who had the charm and resources to sweep her off her feet. I confronted her the moment she walked through the door. "Who is Jake?" I asked, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. She froze, her eyes widening in shock. "What are you talking about?" she stammered, but the tremor in her voice gave her away. "Don't lie to me. I saw the messages. You've been cheating on me." The accusation hung in the air, thick with betrayal. Her expression morphed from shock to denial. "You don't understand. It's not what you think," she pleaded, but I could see the panic in her eyes. "Then explain it to me," I said, my tone cold and unyielding. The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, she burst into tears, confessing to her indiscretions. "I was lonely. You're always at work, and Jake, he made me feel alive again." Her words felt like a kick to the gut. I had been working hard to provide for us, and she had repaid my dedication with betrayal. I wanted to scream, to throw things, to make her feel the pain she had inflicted on me. But I held back, choosing to absorb the shock instead. The emotional turmoil overwhelmed me. Anger, sadness, and a profound sense of betrayal washed over me in waves. I felt like a fool, a puppet whose strings had been cut. As she continued to cry, I felt a strange clarity emerge from the chaos. I could choose to react with rage or to plot my next move with precision. I knew I had to take control of the situation, not just for my own sanity but to ensure she understood the gravity of her actions. That night, as I lay in bed next to her, I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing with thoughts of revenge. I wouldn't just let this go. No, I would make her realize what she had lost. I would ensure she faced the consequences of her betrayal, and I would do it in a way that she would never forget. This was just the beginning. I decided then and there that I would play the long game. She had made her choice, and now I would make mine. In the days that followed my discovery, I was engulfed in a whirlwind of emotions. Anger simmered beneath the surface, but it was sadness that dominated my thoughts. I had once viewed my marriage as a partnership built on trust, love, and shared dreams. Now, all of that felt like a distant memory, replaced by a gnawing sense of betrayal. I went through the motions of daily life, but everything felt hollow. I would sit across from her at dinner, pretending that we were still the couple we used to be, but the truth loomed over us like a dark cloud. She would attempt to initiate conversation, but I could only nod in response, my mind drifting to the images of her with Jake. The intimacy they shared felt like a knife twisting in my gut, and I couldn't shake the feeling of inadequacy that lingered in the back of my mind. I often found myself lost in thought, replaying our life together in my head. Was I really that neglectful? Had I pushed her into Jake's arms? I wrestled with these questions, trying to make sense of the chaos, but deep down, I knew that her actions were not a reflection of my worth. They were a reflection of her choices. Late at night, as I lay awake, I contemplated my next move. I could feel the anger rising within me, a fire that demanded to be unleashed. I wanted her to understand the depth of her betrayal, to feel the pain I felt. But how? I needed a plan, a strategy that would ensure she would remember this moment for the rest of her life. I started to outline my approach. First, I would gather evidence of her infidelity. I knew that confronting her with just the messages wouldn't be enough. I needed to show her that I wasn't just going to roll over and accept her betrayal. I would become a shadow in her life, observing her every move, piecing together the puzzle of her deceit. Over the next few weeks, I took on the role of an investigator. I followed her when she left the house, discreetly tracking her movements. I was meticulous, documenting everything. I watched her meet Jake at a cafe, their laughter ringing in my ears like a cruel melody. I took pictures, capturing moments that would serve as undeniable proof of her betrayal. Each snapshot fueled the fire of my revenge, solidifying my resolve to make her life as miserable as she had made mine. Yet, as I gathered evidence, I also began to notice other things. The way she would dress when she thought she was meeting him, the little lies she told about where she was going, the guilt that hung in the air like a thick fog. It was as if I was watching a play unfold, and I was both the audience and the critic. I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of empowerment. I was no longer the passive husband. I was taking control of my narrative. The more I observed, the more I realized that I needed to hit her where it would hurt the most, her financial security. As a banker, Jake had the means to provide her with a lifestyle that I could no longer afford due to my long hours at work. I knew that if I could disrupt her financial stability, it would serve as a powerful reminder of what she stood to lose. I began to devise a plan to ensure she would be forever broke and miserable. I consulted a lawyer about our finances, looking for loopholes and opportunities to protect my assets. I considered the implications of a divorce, but I wanted to ensure that I had the upper hand. I would not only seek a fair settlement but also make it clear that her actions had consequences. I felt a sense of determination wash over me. I was no longer just a husband scorned. I was a man on a mission. I would make her realize that infidelity came with a price, and I would be the one to collect it. As I plotted my course of action, I found solace in the idea that I was taking control of my life again. I would turn the tables on her, and in doing so, I would reclaim my dignity. The emotional turmoil I had experienced would become a catalyst for my transformation. I was ready to play the long game, and I would emerge victorious. With my plan taking shape, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. I was no longer just a victim of my wife's betrayal. I was a strategist, and every move I made would be calculated and deliberate. I had to ensure that my actions were not merely reactions to her infidelity, but a well-thought-out response that would leave a lasting impact on her life. The first step in my strategy was to tighten my grip on our finances. I began by reviewing our joint accounts, scrutinizing every transaction. I discovered that she had been siphoning small amounts of money into a separate account, presumably to fund her rendezvous with Jake. This revelation ignited a fire within me. I wouldn't just confront her about it. I would use it as leverage in our impending confrontation. I also started taking note of her spending habits. I observed how she would splurge on new clothes and fancy dinners, often justifying her purchases as treats for herself. I realized that she was living a lifestyle that was unsustainable, especially if I decided to cut her off financially. The thought of her facing the consequences of her choices filled me with a sense of satisfaction. As I gathered evidence and mapped out my plan, I knew I had to be patient. I couldn't act too soon. I needed to wait for the right moment to unleash my strategy, the moment when she would be most vulnerable. In the meantime, I continued to play the role of the dutiful husband. I would engage in conversations with her about our future, asking about her dreams and aspirations. I wanted to keep her off balance, to make her think that I was willing to forgive and forget. But inside, I was a storm brewing, ready to unleash my fury at the opportune moment. Days turned into weeks, and I watched as she became increasingly comfortable with her double life. The way she would smile at me, the way she would casually mention her friends in passing, it all felt like a cruel joke. I found myself rehearsing the confrontation in my mind, envisioning how I would reveal the truth, how I would strip away her facade and expose her betrayal for what it was. Finally, the moment arrived. It was a Friday evening, and I knew she had plans to meet Jake that night. I had been waiting for this opportunity, and I was ready. I gathered all the evidence I had collected, the messages, the photographs, the bank statements, and placed them in a folder. I could feel my heart racing as I prepared for the confrontation. When she walked through the door that evening, her face lit up with excitement. "Hey, I have a surprise for dinner," she said, her enthusiasm palpable. I couldn't help but scoff internally. The real surprise was about to unfold. "Actually, I have something to discuss with you," I said, my tone firm. Her smile faltered as she sensed the shift in the atmosphere. "What is it?" she asked, her voice tinged with apprehension. I took a deep breath and opened the folder, sliding the evidence across the table. "I know about Jake. I know everything," I said, watching her expression morph from confusion to horror. Her eyes widened as she scanned the contents of the folder. You don't understand. It's not what it looks like." She stammered, but I could see the panic in her eyes. "No. Then explain to me why you've been lying to me and sneaking around behind my back," I challenged, my voice steady. "You've made your choice, and now you'll have to face the consequences." She began to cry, but I remained resolute. "You think you can just throw away our marriage and walk away unscathed? You were living a lie, and now it's time for you to confront the truth." In that moment, I felt a sense of power wash over me. I was no longer the one who had been wronged. I was the one in control. I watched as the realization dawned on her that her actions had consequences, and that her financial security, her lifestyle, and her future were all at stake. "I'm going to make sure you understand what it means to betray me," I continued, my voice low and steady. "You will face the repercussions of your choices, and I won't let you forget it." As she sobbed, I felt a mix of emotion, satisfaction, anger, and a strange sense of relief. I had taken the first step in executing my plan, and while it felt good to confront her, I knew this was only the beginning. The long game was still ahead of me, and I was determined to ensure that she would be left, forever broke and miserable. The aftermath of our confrontation was a whirlwind of chaos. My wife's tears and pleas for forgiveness echoed in my mind long after I had left the dining room. I had unleashed the truth, and now it was time to implement the next phase of my plan. I needed to ensure that her life would be irrevocably changed, that she would understand the weight of her betrayal. Once the initial shock wore off, I noticed a shift in her demeanor. The confident, carefree woman I once knew was replaced by a shadow of her former self. She spent her days in a fog, trying to navigate the fallout of our confrontation. I could see the toll it was taking on her, not just emotionally, but financially as well. The facade she had maintained was crumbling, and I was determined to expedite that process. I started by consulting with my lawyer about the divorce proceedings. I explained my situation, detailing the evidence I had gathered. My lawyer was supportive and suggested that I file for divorce on the grounds of infidelity, which would entitle me to a more favorable settlement. The thought of this made me feel empowered. I was finally taking control of my life. As the divorce process began, I made sure to keep a close eye on my wife's spending habits. I had already frozen our joint accounts to prevent her from making any unnecessary purchases. This was a crucial step in my plan to destabilize her financially. I wanted her to experience the anxiety that comes with financial insecurity, the same way I had felt when I discovered her betrayal. The first time she approached me about the frozen accounts, I could see the desperation in her eyes. "We need to talk about the money," she said, her voice trembling. "I can't pay for anything. I thought you would understand." I feigned sympathy, a mask that felt foreign on my face. "I thought you were fine on your own, considering how you've been spending money lately," I replied, trying to keep my tone neutral. "Perhaps it's time to reevaluate your priorities." The look of despair on her face was almost satisfying. I felt a sense of power as I watched her struggle to adapt to her new reality. She was no longer the woman who had taken me for granted. She was now a woman facing the consequences of her choices. As the divorce proceedings continued, I made it a point to gather more evidence of her infidelity. I hired a private investigator to follow her, to document her meetings with Jake and any other potential indiscretions. I wanted to ensure that when we went to court, I would have a solid case that would leave no room for doubt. I was meticulous, collecting photographs, timestamps, and witness statements. Each time I received a new report, I felt a surge of vindication. I was not just a victim, I was a man fighting back. I began to strategize how I would present this evidence in court, envisioning her reaction when the truth was laid bare before the judge. I wanted her to know that her actions had consequences, and I was the one to enforce them. With each passing day, I could see her unraveling. She would come home late, her eyes puffy from crying, and I could sense her frustration and helplessness. I didn't offer her comfort. Instead, I remained distant, creating a chasm between us that mirrored the betrayal she had inflicted. One evening, as I was reviewing some documents for the upcoming court date, she approached me with a proposition. "What if we try to work this out? We can go to counseling, try to fix things." She suggested, her voice laced with desperation. I looked at her, suppressing a smirk. "You think counseling can undo what you've done? You've made your choice, and now you have to live with the consequences." Her expression shifted from hope to despair. I could see the realization settling in. There was no going back. I was determined to make her understand that her actions had not only hurt me but would also leave her with nothing. As the divorce date approached, I felt a mix of anxiety and anticipation. I knew that the courtroom would be the final battleground, where I would lay bare the truth of her betrayal and secure my future. The thought of her facing the consequences of her actions filled me with a sense of purpose. The long game was nearing its climax, and I was ready to emerge victorious. The day of the divorce hearing arrived with an air of tension that felt almost tangible. I dressed meticulously, choosing a dark suit that made me feel powerful and in control. As I made my way to the courthouse, I could feel the adrenaline coursing through my veins, a mixture of anxiety and excitement. This was the moment I had been preparing for, the culmination of my plans, and I was determined to see it through. As I entered the courtroom, I felt a wave of unease wash over me. The stark, sterile environment was a far cry from the warmth of the home we once shared. I took my seat, my heart pounding as I waited for her to arrive. I could see her through the glass doors, her face pale and drawn. She looked like a ghost of the woman I had once known, and for a moment I felt a flicker of sympathy. But it quickly faded as I reminded myself of the betrayal that had led us to this point. When the judge called our case, I stood tall, ready to present my evidence. My lawyer began by outlining the grounds for the divorce, emphasizing her infidelity and the emotional distress it had caused me. I could see my wife's expression shift from defiance to despair as the details of her betrayal were laid bare. Each piece of evidence felt like a nail in the coffin of our marriage, and I relished the moment. As the hearing progressed, I watched her squirm. In her seat, her confidence fading with every revelation. My lawyer presented the photographs of her with Jake, the messages filled with affection, and the bank statements showing her financial irresponsibility. It was a systematic dismantling of her facade, and I felt a sense of vindication with each passing moment. Then came the most critical part of the hearing, my testimony. I took a deep breath and stepped forward, ready to speak my truth. I trusted my wife with my heart and my life. I began, my voice steady but filled with emotion. I dedicated myself to our marriage, working tirelessly to provide for us. In return, I received betrayal and deceit. I looked directly at her, and for a brief moment our eyes locked. I could see the pain and regret etched on her face, and it fueled my resolve. She chose to be with another man, and now she wants to pretend that everything can be fixed. But trust is not something that can be rebuilt overnight. It takes years to build and a moment to destroy. I could feel the weight of my words, each one resonating with the gravity of our situation. I wanted her to understand that this was not just about the end of our marriage. It was about accountability. I was no longer the man she had taken for granted. I was a force to be reckoned with. After I finished my testimony, my lawyer presented the financial implications of the divorce. We had built a life together, but I made it clear that I would not allow her to benefit from her betrayal. I requested that she receive minimal spousal support, arguing that her infidelity had jeopardized our financial stability. I could see her face fall as the reality of her situation began to sink in. The judge listened intently, weighing the evidence and the testimonies. As the proceedings continued, I could feel a sense of triumph building within me. This was the moment I had envisioned, the moment where I would reclaim my life and my dignity. When the judge finally delivered the ruling, I felt a rush of relief mixed with exhilaration. She would receive a fraction of what she expected, and I would walk away with the peace of mind that I had stood up for myself. The gavel struck, signaling the end of our marriage, and I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. As we left the courtroom, I noticed the look of despair on her face. The reality of her new life was beginning to set in, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. I had executed my plan and I had emerged victorious. But as I walked away, I also felt a pang of something else. Was it remorse? I had one, but at what cost? I had dismantled the life we had built together, and while I felt justified, there was a part of me that wondered if this was truly the victory I had envisioned. I shook off the feeling, reminding myself of the betrayal that had driven me to this point. I had played the long game and won, but the emotional toll was still heavy. I was free now, but the scars of our marriage would linger. As I stepped out into the sunlight, I took a deep breath, ready to embrace my new beginning. I was determined to rebuild my life, to create a future that was mine alone. The long game had been played, and now it was time to look ahead. As the days turned into weeks following the divorce, I found myself navigating a new landscape, one that was both liberating and daunting. The weight of my wife's betrayal had lifted, and yet the emotional scars remained. I had executed my plan meticulously, ensuring that she faced the consequences of her actions, but I was left with a lingering question. Was this the right path for me? The first few weeks of my newfound freedom were a mix of exhilaration and emptiness. I dove into work, channeling my energy into projects that had been neglected during the turmoil of my marriage. I found solace in my career, a place where I could regain a sense of control and accomplishment. I began to rebuild my professional relationships, and slowly but surely, I started to rediscover the man I had been before the betrayal. I also took time for myself, exploring hobbies I had long set aside. I reconnected with friends, enjoying nights out and laughter that felt foreign yet refreshing. I realized that I had lost a part of myself in the marriage, and now I was reclaiming it piece by piece. But amid the newfound freedom, the shadows of my past still lingered. I would occasionally think of her, how she was adjusting to her new life, the financial struggles she would face, and the loneliness that would accompany her decisions. The satisfaction I felt after the court ruling began to fade, replaced by a sense of melancholy. I had wanted her to suffer, to understand the repercussions of her infidelity, but I also recognized the human cost of my actions. I had taken a woman who had once been my partner and reduced her to a state of vulnerability. One evening, while I was sitting at a bar, I overheard a couple arguing. The bitterness in their voices struck a chord within me, reminding me of my own tumultuous relationship. I realized that infidelity was not just a betrayal. It was a complex web of emotions, insecurities, and choices that could lead to devastating consequences. I had played my part in the unraveling of our marriage, too, by allowing work to consume me and neglecting the emotional connection we once shared. As I reflected on my journey, I recognized that revenge had not brought me the closure I had hoped for. Instead, it had left me grappling with the emotional fallout of our relationship. I had won the battle, but the war within myself was far from over. I began to seek therapy, a decision that felt both daunting and necessary. I wanted to understand my own emotions, to process the pain and betrayal, and to learn how to move forward without carrying the weight of resentment. In therapy, I learned about forgiveness, not for her, but for myself. I realized that holding onto anger and bitterness would only keep me tethered to the past. I needed to let go of the hurt to truly embrace my future. It was a slow process, but with each session I felt a little lighter, a little more at peace. Eventually, I reached a point where I could acknowledge my wife's role in our relationship without allowing it to define me. Yes, she had betrayed my trust, but I had also contributed to the breakdown of our marriage. It was a painful realization, but it was also liberating. I could forgive her for her mistakes, and in doing so, I could forgive myself for my own shortcomings. As months turned into a year, I found myself in a better place. I had rebuilt my life, focusing on my career, my friendships, and my personal growth. I even started dating again, cautiously opening my heart to the possibility of love. I was no longer the man who had been scorned. I was a man who had learned from his experience, a man who understood the importance of trust and communication. In the end, I realized that the long game I had played was not just about seeking revenge. It was about reclaiming my life and learning to navigate the complexities of relationships. I had come to understand that love and trust are fragile, and they require constant nurturing. I had emerged from the ashes of my marriage, not just as a victor, but as a man who had grown wiser and stronger. I looked forward to the future with hope, ready to embrace new challenges and opportunities. Life was a journey, and I was determined to make the most of it, carrying with me the lessons I had learned along the way. As I stepped out into the world, I felt a sense of peace settle within me. I had played the long game, and in the end, I had won something far more valuable than revenge. I had won my freedom, and with that, I was ready to write the next chapter of my life.